Hello, and welcome to Canto per Canto. My name is Stefano Albertini. I'm the director of Casa Italiana at Zerilli-Marimò at New York University, that is along with the Department of Italian Studies at NYU and with the Dante Society of America, the promoter of this series. It's a great honor to be a part of it. So not only the producers, but also one of the makers of the protagonist, along with one of my best friends and a wonderful scholar of medieval literature and Dante studies. That is Federica Anichini. Federica is currently teaching at NYU Florence, where we both are in this moment. And she decided to talk to you today about Purgatorio 24. Welcome, Federica. And let's start in medias res, because this is a canto in medias res. We are in the middle of something. So appraise us of where we are, with whom, what are they doing, why are they there? All these basic questions, and then we'll delve into some of the fun stuff of the canto.
Yes, so the canto does open indeed in medias res. Dante the Pilgrim and Forese Donati, one of his best friends from Dante's youth, enter the scene really walking, and they walk fast. Dante uses a beautiful image, like if there were ships pushed by the wind. And they're walking and they're talking. And again, they're both poets, and the whole canto, actually a small series really of cantos within Purgatory, is specifically dedicated to relationships among poets. And so this is not an exception. And in this canto, we find mainly poets. So Dante and Forese are talking, and then they run into one of, again, the fellow poets of Dante, Bonagiunta da Lucca. They have a very quick conversation. Then they resume their walk. They are almost at the peak of the Purgatory mountain. That's Canto 24 again. And towards the end of the canto, the souls gather around a tree where there are some fruits out of which, and those are mainly the not very, in fact, many actions of the canto. So it's really a canto about the conversation that Dante has specifically with Bonagiunta.
Federica, why are they being punished? Why are they in purgatory? What sin are they expiating for? And how is this sin punished in Purgatorio as opposed to Inferno?
The sinners here are gluttons. Now, given the fact that we are in Purgatory, Dante is in no way as harsh as he was with the gluttons of the Inferno. So here the souls are punished by being emaciated. They are in this constant state of hunger, and they're very, very thin, almost skeletons. Although, of course, they are souls. And in fact, Dante is not able to recognize them. And it is Forese who introduces Bonagiunta to Dante, because Dante would have been unable to see that he had Bonagiunta in front of him. And also Dante recognizes Forese by the voice. So it's the poets do not manifest themselves with their features.
So they are friends and they're poets. So would you say this is a canto about friendship and poetry, both? Which one is prevailing? And is there a connection between poetry and gluttony that we don't see now?
It is definitely about friendship and poetry. In this canto, the two are not connected, because Dante, in fact, stands alone as a poet in this canto, and he stands as the master and the initiator of a new poetic mode. In terms of the connection between the scene of gluttony and poetry, yes, there is a connection. It is interesting, I think, to reflect on the relation of passion versus virtue. So Dante contrasts passion, a way of being driven without attention and without measure, and we will see how this is connected to writing, and virtue, being balanced, being in the wake of a dictator, and we will get to that in a moment.
Federica, in these Canto, we have, for those of you who are scholars of medieval literature, a fundamental defining moment. You call it a birth certificate of a very important movement in Italian, and we can say world literature. Tell us about these official birth document of.
So, as I said, it's a canto that has as its core content dialogue, and that is a dialogue between the pilgrim and Bonagiunta Orbiciani or Bonagiunta da Lucca. And Forese introduces Bonagiunta to Dante, and Bonagiunta asks Dante if he is actually the one who wrote the poem, Ladies Who Have Intelligence of Love. So they do address each other as authors, mainly. They don't even use their own names. And Dante replies with a tercet in which he really describes what a poet does in his own mind. And it's really a poetic manifesto. And the immediately following tercet is the tercet in which Bonagiunta uses the words dolce stil novo, that are the three words that defines the new poetic movement founded by Dante.
Federica, I cannot resist the temptation of asking you to read that tercet. I haven't mentioned that you are a real Florentine, born and raised in Florence. We have a chance of hearing the comedy proclaimed in the tone, in the accent, the voice that is probably as close as possible to what Dante sounded like. So please read for us that famous tercet.
Okay.
And then comment on it, and then explain it to us.
Okay. The tercet is as follows in Italian. E io a lui, mi sono un che, quando amor m'ispira, noto, e a quel modo che ditta dentro vo significando. So Dante really here introduces himself by way of his mode of writing. And what he says is that he is one who writes following an internal inspiration. And again, that's the theme of the wind and breathe. We'll get to that in a moment. He follows an internal inspiration, which corresponds to an external voice that dictates him what to write. And this is actually the source of his writing. He says, this is how I produce meaning, vo significando. So here Dante is telling us that he is following a very specific and essential source of inspiration. And this source is amor with capital A, love. And of course, we are talking about a transcendent presence here of divine nature who dictates to Dante what to write. And Dante also tells us that the way he intends poetry is new and different. That is to say, his poetry, his writing, is really an investigation of its own object. So by describing this action of following so closely its object, Dante is telling us that by writing, he pursue knowledge of this same object. To this tercet, Bonagiunta replies by saying, should I read this as well in my Dantesque voice?
Yes, please. Use your best Dantesque voice. We're all ears.
Sure. So Dante replies by saying, "Oh frate, issa veggio, diss'egli, il nodo che il notaro e Guittone e me ritenne di qua, dal dolce stil novo che io odo." So here, Bonagiunta,
Fede, some of your colleagues spend their lives investigating this nodo, this knot. So
exactly.
Tell us what this knot is, with this poetic not is, and where everybody stands, all these people that we heard mentioned, where do they stand? Please.
Yeah, but this is the key word of one of the key words of the canto. Buonaggiunta says, "Oh, finally, I understand." And me, Notaro and Guittone, he mentions two poets of the time, are so behind this nod, this knot, this barrier. So really, Buonaggiunta declares that there has been a barrier, that it was unsurmountable for them. And it's interesting to see how, in fact, Dante, before this tercet, has conveyed the image of a nodo of a completely different nature. So Buonaggiunta says nodo, meaning something that has interrupted a flow, a poetic tradition. And Dante instead has described a nodo meant as a nexus between creature and creator, by saying that as a poet, he is just following the voice of the dictator, of love, of the creator. Dante has a very different take on the word not. So they do belong to very separate categories. And Dante is, as you said before, clearly friendship and poetry are essential, but Dante in this canto really stands alone on this.
The poem that identifies Dante, Donne che avete intellette d'amore, why that poem and not one of the dozens others that Dante had already written? Why that one in particular identified Dante, we have to assume, before he wrote the comedy?
Yeah, that is the...
Can we say it was like his poetic manifesto?
In a way, I mean, it's definitely a poem. It's a poem included in the Vita Nova, which, as you know, is a combination of prose and poems. And it's probably the first poem in which Dante declares that his writing has the praise of the lady as its aim. So he does not expect any response from the lady. And this somehow can be also connected to the idea of gluttony, of not having measure. So it's not this condition of want that Dante connects to poetry any longer, but just writing in itself is a state of fulfillment, of contentment, as opposed to some earthly hunger that, as we know, is never completely exhausted. So this is, again, another moment in which Dante plays around the notion of gluttony and poetry.
And how would you define, like, for our friends who are listening that are not expert of Italian literature, what is the revolution of Dolce Stil Novo? What did it really bring about that was not present in previous poetry? Why is it novel? Why is it? And do you have trouble making it clear to your students what's the novelty between, like, a poem of Guittone d'Arezzo or one of the other that came before, and De Guinizelli or Dante or one of his friends that belong to the Dolce Stil Novo? Why is it novel? Why is it revolutionary?
It's revolutionary because Dante found a way of writing poetry which is a journey to knowledge, and a journey of knowledge, and a journey aiming at a transcendent object of knowledge. So there is this stretch, which is the stretch covered by the pilgrim in his journey, aiming at reaching the highest point possible in our learning process. And this is what poetry is about, and what poetry certainly was not in the mind of Dante's fellow poets before, who were just basically replicating some models that they had inherited from either the French or the Sicilian tradition. So Dante does break with that tradition and does test himself as a poet in a way that had been unthinkable before, using his own imagination as the divine skill of a human being to the maximum possibility, to the maximum potential.
Federica, we said that it's a poem. It's a canto about friendship and poetry. These are friends, and these are poets. Going back to Forese, Dante's friend, they had a different kind of poetic dialogue in their life, a fun one, and we want to hear about that one. That's very different from this one. That is very elevated. It's about the very nature of poetry. It's about their very craft and the philosophy behind it. What was that? What was that exchange about? La tenzone. And maybe you want to tell us something about the genre of the tenzone.
Yeah, the spectrum of poetic production was pretty wide. And in fact, Forese, who was not, has not remained as a very talented poet, still had exchanged, again, tenzoni with Dante. There were really competition of poems with very, how can I say, the topics were very daily and certainly not elevated. In one of these poems, there is an allusion to the fact that one's wife is not good enough in making the bed warm. So, when I say daily topics, this is what I mean. So something very, very different from the Divine Comedy. Nevertheless, Forese is welcomed as a very dear friend, clearly, and is with Dante in this 24 of the Purgatorio.
Federica, the thing that gets closer to the tenzone, to rapping sessions in which one duels, it enters into almost a duel with the other one. It's a poetic duel that, of course, it's much better than any other. There is no bloodshed normally. In some of the rapping tradition also there is some bloodshed and gunfire. But that's the idea, that you fight with the other using rhymes, and that you have a confrontation that can be very open, can be very vulgar, can be using all sort of curses and words and bad words. So it's interesting that the previous poetic interchange was of that kind, and then we are transported into these dimensions.
Exactly.
And
but
as
there
a
are,
last...
Go ahead. No, I was just about to say that there are echoes also for the tenzone in Buonaggiunta, because Buonaggiunta himself had written a poem in which he was complaining about the fact that these new poets, of which Dante, of course, is the best example, were writing things that were really very obscure. So again, this tenzone mode also is, what can I say, deals also with topics that are in fact important and essential.
And we are getting close to our final moment. And since many of the colleagues that have come before us in Canto per Canto have done a great job, I think, in trying to make us understand the relevance of this canto today. And I know it's a constant struggle. People like you teaching the Middle Ages, or like me teaching the Renaissance, what does it have to do with today? Are these concepts, are these ideas still relevant? Do they still have a value for our students, our American students and not American students today? And what would that be? What would you ask your students to take home from the reading of Purgatorio 24?
Well, once we connect poetry to knowledge or building knowledge, and once we connect this to gluttony, what I would tell students is that this sin in our current times is this bulimic attitude that we have towards knowledge and information. So basically, the gluttoners are nowadays people who don't, who are not careful, who are not attentive when absorbing knowledge. And what Dante is telling us instead is that it has to be a step-by-step process, very careful, very slow, very looking for a resonance between the inside and outside. And I think this is a very good and effective lesson for our times, in fact.
And now we're doing our little stunt. We mentioned that we are both in Florence, and of course we wanted to show ourselves together because this canto, as we said, it's an homage to friendship, and we consider this reading of Purgatorio 24 also as an homage, all modesty aside, si parva licet componere magnis, also to our friendship. Thank you for listening, and thank you to Federica Anichini.
Thank you to everybody. Goodbye.